Welcome to the MIT Social Entrepreneurship Alumni Group webinar, Data and AI Transforming Investment Opportunities in Developing Countries. I am Sayuri Sharper, President of SEAG and moderator of today's session. Use of data science and artificial intelligence are undoubtedly driving product innovations in developed countries. How relevant are they to improving lives of low-income people in the developing countries? Can use of data science and AI enable social enterprises to scale their impact faster? Are significant investment being made to realize these benefits? We will pose these and other questions to our speakers. We are delighted to have two social entrepreneurs and one impact VC investor on this panel to share their thoughts on this topic. The webinar will start with 10-minute initial remarks from each speaker. We will then spend the remaining time for Q&A. Our first speaker is Jacob Rosenblum, CEO and co-founder of Levy. Jacob is a mission-driven entrepreneur, fascinated by the ability of technology to generate profit by both correcting economic inefficiencies and increasing opportunity for everyone. Jacob is on his third venture in the workspace at Levy. Our second speaker is Kalyan Siva, CEO and co-founder of 5C Network. Kalyan doesn't believe in following the norms and has a unique way of approaching problems. One of his primary career aims is to make India healthier by making accurate and timely diagnosis possible in every part of the country. He sees 5C Network as getting prepared to lead the next big health transformation in India. And our last speaker is Daniel Block, investment principal at Mercy Corp Ventures. Dan leads investment sourcing and portfolio management across Latin America and Africa, with a focus on climate adaptation and financial resiliency at Mercy Corp Ventures. He began his career on Wall Street before transitioning into emerging markets impact investing 8 years ago. As we go along, please type your questions at any time during the webinar. We will get to them after the initial remarks. Before we get started though, I'd like to say a few words about MIT SEAG. SEAG is organized under MIT Alumni Association. Our mission is to bring together MIT alum and like-minded people to co-create a better world through social entrepreneurship and impact investing. Terminology is important. What do we mean by social entrepreneurship? Any organization that is address unmet social need or environmental problem through our market-driven approach. And impact investments are investment made with the intent to contribute measurable positive social or environmental impact. If any of you are not a SEAG member yet, I'd like to invite you to join us. In addition to webinars, we also host live pitch sessions, mentoring programs, and other networking events to connect our members to each other. To go, please go to mit-c.mn.co. Now let me invite Jacob to join us as our first speaker. Jacob?
Hi, Sayuri.
Hi, Jacob. Maybe before we start, I want to just let everybody know that I am an investor in Levy, so just make sure that there's no conflict. Go ahead, Jacob.
Sure. So thank you very much for the kind introduction. It's an honor to be with everybody today. So Levy is an artificial intelligence company based in Brazil, but with operations in Colombia, also in Mexico, in the US, also recently expanding to Peru as well. Our focus is on people analytics. So what we're really passionate about at Levy is understanding the concept of the Gini coefficient, obviously income inequality. In emerging markets, it becomes very magnified, and it becomes extremely magnified, and sometimes we even say exponentially magnified in spaces like the workforce, right? Because for a lot of different reasons, which I'm sure we'll talk about in the course of this discussion, there are a lot of barriers, social barriers to education and to financial inclusion, but that all comes bearing down on people's access to the workforce. So essentially, Latin America has always hovered around 50% formal, informal. I don't really think it will ever change. And in fact, if you look at developed markets like the US, they're going in that direction as well, which means that there's a very real barrier to workforce inclusion, specifically for young people and for people without traditional education and experience, which of course is almost everyone. So Levy was born with this mission to democratize opportunity by understanding the employment outcomes that large companies across Latin America are looking to have. So to cite some names, we work with CNA, which is a Dutch retail conglomerate that is very large across Latin America, also has a very big impact fund associated with the conglomerate. Also, Pernambucanas, which we frequently say is like the Target of Brazil. Also, Pets. So a number of very large retailers across Latin America that need to hire tens, if not hundreds, of thousands of people per year, and without Levy, essentially practice processes for hiring that involve a lot of systemic bias. So what we do with them is understand their employment outcomes and then obviously develop algorithms that will replicate what they're trying to obtain without using things like resumes, other kind of vehicles for systemic bias that force the exponentialization of the Gini coefficient. So in terms of dimension of our operation, we have scored over 5 million people across Latin America. We have placed over 150,000 people in formal work. 85% of them were either females, chronically unemployed or underemployed, or from vulnerable populations, including refugee populations. During the Venezuelan refugee crisis with about 2.5 years ago, we had a team on the border between Brazil and Venezuela that was helping place Venezuelan refugees in formal jobs in Brazil. So what we take a lot of pride in at Levy is that we've developed a model that not only has a deep social impact component to it, but of course, when we talk about market solutions, the reason that these companies hire us and pay us for our software is that we're proving to them that the people that we're placing perform better. So whatever the performance target that a company will have, some companies might have sales targets, some others might have culture or NPS targets. What we prove to them is that Levy, in a blind way, using algorithms, is recruiting more fairly and also more effectively, obviously faster and cheaper, but producing better results than just the team of human recruiters on their own. So so that's our mission, is bringing opportunity to the masses across Latin America. It's an exciting time. Like I said, we're present in 5 countries. We should place over 50,000 people in formal jobs this year across Latin America, which is something we're extremely excited about. And so I wanted to thank everyone for the opportunity and look forward to answering any questions you might have.
Thanks, Jacob. Now let's introduce Kalian. And again, a disclosure, I invest in a fund that invests in 5C Network. So with that, Kalian.
Oh yeah, Sayuri, I hope I'm audible and you guys can see my screen as well, right?
Yes, we can.
Let me just get it on full screen for a second. Yes, fantastic. First of all, to Sayuri and team, thank you so much for having me. So I'm Kalyan Shivasel, and I run a company called 5C Network. I will be taking you in the next 10 minutes through broadly 4 parts. How the company started, what our early product design were, and how we try to achieve product market fit, how we are actually able to be competitive in terms of pricing and in terms of scale using technology, and where we really think the business is today and where we really think it can be. I've titled this presentation "The Power of Technology and the Perspectives of an Enterprise Practitioner and a Believer in AI." And I hope by the end of this presentation, all of you will be believers in the power of AI to deliver incredible scale and incredible quality of healthcare. So the story of 5C starts in the southern city of Bangalore in India. My then friend and now co-founder Syed was actually admitted into a large, well-known hospital in Bangalore. And he had gotten an MRI scan of his brain and spine that had taken over 2 days to get reported. And when I can be a pretty belligerent guy when I feel like I'm being wronged or I'm not getting what I should. And so I was fighting with the hospital authorities, and one of them came up to me we admitted Syed on a Friday afternoon. One of them came up to me on Saturday night and said, "Boss, listen, if we can give you a report now, but it's probably going to be wrong, and then it's going to be disastrous for you and for us. So you need to wait till Monday afternoon when the specialist comes." And so it just seemed to me like there's this clear trade-off, right? Especially in healthcare, between accuracy and timeliness. And it seemed to me the only way I could describe it was it was like an art, right? Where this one radiologist, this savior, comes in on a Monday morning and writes this beautiful report that is the only report that can save my colleague. It just seemed like it's a very esoteric, a very inaccessible thing. And I could describe it as an art. And I said that, hey, diagnosis is such an important part of our lives that you can't consider it an art. Diagnostics has to be a science. And that was the whole thesis behind 5C Network, right? We want to convert diagnostics from an art to a science. A science is something that is predictable, that is scalable, that is measurable, and that is always accurate and always timely, right? That is what a science is. And so we said we want to make diagnostics a science. And that's how we started 5C. So 5C Network is today India's largest online radiology platform. What we do is we work with hospitals and diagnostic centers across the country. These are small hospitals and diagnostic centers spread across India, and we integrate with them to pull their digital radiology images, get it onto our cloud, and then use technology to help a radiologist sitting somewhere else report this case. And I'll talk a little bit, obviously, about the scale that we have got. And so after Syed's ordeal, we started looking at the problem itself, and we realized that there are 3 broad issues, right? There is a low per capita of specialists. In the US, there are maybe 50,000 radiologists. In India, there are 11,000. And we are over 1.3 billion people, right? You can imagine this, right? There are some states, that are basically reasonably large countries in India. So these 3 states, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, and Jharkhand, have a population of 400 million. They're served by 500 radiologists. And radiology is a really growing field. And we realized that this is the primary reason, lack of access is the primary reason for poor turnaround times and poor accuracy. And we knew that a solution that exists somewhere else in the world would probably not work for a country like India, where scale is everything and pricing has to be down. And so we said that we need to think of a new way to solve this issue. And we realized that the only way to solve at massive scale for India is to provide AI-powered radiology across the country. And then, when we looked at it, we saw that there was a chicken and egg problem, right? I want to do AI-powered radiology, but I have absolutely no data, right? Where do I get all this data from that I can train my internal models and give it to partners to train their AI specifically for us so that we can deliver better? So we had this chicken and egg problem. And that's when we started realizing what the product should be. And we said that we will build a teleradiology product that is so, maniacal in terms of measuring quality and tagging images, that we will build our own data bank, our own annotated data bank, using the business that we do and the data that we collect from clients. So we consulted a bunch of legal firms, and we realized that there is a specific wording we could use in order to make this legal, where we could collect data, anonymize it, and then tag it in every situation to make sure that we know exactly what is wrong with that particular case and use that to train our model. So today, when a case comes into 5C, there is an inbound quality check where we tag particular issues. There is a radiologist who reads the case and gives us a full textual report. Then there is another team of senior technicians and radiologists who actually look at the report and tag and box every issue in an image. So 5C today has the world's largest data bank of annotated medical images that are immediately AI infusable. Once we got to 1 million cases, we started working with partners and building our own in-house team to actually make AI algorithms that run on the 5C platform, right? These are some of the algorithms that we're using today. So these are the 4 major ones. We have something called CAL. And CAL is an algorithm that reads hand x-rays and now foot x-rays and actually detects fractures. Radiologists, make a lot of mistakes and actually just the basic hand x-ray. We have another algorithm that we call Charles. Charles actually reads chest CT scans. And it was huge during COVID time when we reported over 10,000 cases in a single day, right? We needed AI to pre-process these images and actually give us the CT severity score. Cerebro is, I would say, our most impactful AI. And what Cerebro does is that it actually flags brain bleeds in CT scans that allow us to immediately look at a case and report it. We also have another very interesting algorithm called Bacon. And what Bacon does is that it actually uses disease burden data to flag out potential red herrings in CT scans and common mistakes that radiologists make, right? So these are live algorithms using the data that we have collected on 5C. So that's how, I want to talk about my product market fit. We started with a system that tagged data like anything, right? Like in the most vigorous fashion. And we use that to build our AI, right? And today, just in terms of x-rays, we are able to reduce over 15% of the workload. The brain hemorrhage and our brain bleed algorithm makes radiologists 500% faster in terms of catching brain bleeds. And we've actually increased survival by over 33%, which is something, huge and something we take great pride in. And automatic COVID scoring actually is 75% faster than a radiologist doing it themselves. And we are aiming to make 100% automation in x-rays. And we're actually now inviting external AI companies to build using 5C's data and build on our stack and get access to our over 1,500 clients in India today. So, with all this, what's the impact that we've made? And I'm talking obviously to a group of social entrepreneurs. We estimate very conservatively that we have saved over 10 million hours of waiting time for patients. Over 500,000 patients directly who have critical cases, for whom we believe we have directly aided in saving their life. And over 50% reduction in diagnostics costs for patients. We give the highest quality diagnosis to the most remote parts of the country, which means that people don't have to travel to their nearest cities. And if this is not impact, I really don't know what is. And like I said before, it's a matter of great pride for us. And, finally, what I believe is AI's role in helping in precision medicine. I think AI will really help doctors spend more time on patients, will make pivotal information points available to everyone. And at some point, when genomics is a big thing, hyper-personalized treatment using genomic data, right? And so this is basically what we're doing at 5C. Today, working with over 1,000 clients here, reporting over 150,000 cases every month, and hopefully making an impact and a dent in making healthcare better. Yeah, thank you so much. I hope I was on time.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much, Kalian. That was great. Let me now turn over to Dan to talk a little bit more about perspective from impact investors' point of view. Dan?
Yeah, all right, yeah. got the extra mute button. No, thanks, Sayuri. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to meet you, and excited to be part of this great conversation. I have the pleasure of being the one person on this panel that Sayuri hasn't invested in, although we've had the pleasure of co-investing with Sayuri on a number of investments, including in Levy. So yeah, great to be here. Just to start, wanted to give an overview of Mercy Corps Ventures. We are the impact investment arm of Mercy Corps, which is a global humanitarian organization with a presence in over 40 countries globally, focused on humanitarian response and crisis response, as well as creating resilience and stability in low-income and underserved populations throughout the world. Mercy Corps Ventures, or MCV as we refer to ourselves, started about 5 years ago. We invest in early stage social enterprises in emerging markets with a real focus on backing trailblazing entrepreneurs, building scalable business models. And our focus is largely in Africa, but we also invest in Asia and Latin America. The fund focus is targeted at really challenges in two core themes, one being climate adaptation, and the other around financial resilience. Sectorally, we focus on investments in fintech, blockchain and crypto, ag tech, insurtech, logistics, and other climate tech solutions that reach low-income segments of the population in underserved markets. To date, we've made about 40 investments in companies, and we really try and take a very holistic approach with our investments, working pretty closely with companies post-investment to support them in getting to the next stage. We've recently implemented a new tool in our toolkit, which allows us to provide piloting solutions to be able to test out new innovative use cases and technologies, both within our own portfolio as well as with other portfolio companies. And yeah, our team's growing very quickly as well. So just as an aside, if those that are interested in learning more, we're always recruiting and looking to grow. I think what I wanted to talk about here is, as a fund that's seen the evolution of impact investing and the role of different types of technologies on the impact landscape in emerging markets over the last several years. Wanted to lend a perspective on the role that AI and ML has played over that arc. Recognizing we don't exclusively invest in businesses that are AI and ML driven, but we've certainly seen the influence on our investments and the ecosystem as a whole. To give a bit of perspective, when I left my glass cubicle in New York and moved down to Peru to get started in impact investing in 2014, most of the models that we were seeing that were coming up were really driven by microfinance types of models, driven by models in fair trade agriculture, lots of highly impactful, but very much brick and mortar, physical asset, sort of hand to hand, face to face business models. When Mercy Corps Ventures first started investing back in 2015, there were no unicorns, no startup unicorns in Africa. Today, fast forward to 2022, there are 10 unicorns just looking at Africa. 7 of them were in the last year alone. And you look at sort of what's driven that change. There's obviously a lot of macro factors that's played into it. But breaking down sort of who are the companies that are breaking into this space, and what are they doing that's allowed for this continent, just looking at Africa alone, to scale so significantly from a venture standpoint, and to be able to bring on these multi-billion-dollar valuation companies. What has it been? It's been a significant ability to tap into mass scale from digitization. Certainly, there have been global macro factors that have played a role. A significant drive in Africa, as in many parts of the world, has been the role of fintech and payments. But a key piece that cannot go without highlighting is the role of AI and ML solutions to be able to drive increased activity and scale for businesses that just wouldn't have been able to do so previously. So, to highlight a few of the companies that are sort of hallmarks in this space. One is, and this is the first unicorn in Africa, a company called Jumia, that is basically an Amazon model for Africa. The first sort of flagship e-commerce model in Africa to go into multiple markets. What they've been able to do is through the use of AI to be able to identify different trends within their customer bases, to identify trends in terms of buying and purchasing activity. They've been able to take a model that started in one market in Nigeria and is now in multiple different markets throughout West Africa, as well as East Africa, and expanding to other markets. A similar model more recently, there's a company called Flutterwave that raised a significant round, a couple significant rounds actually last year. It's a Nigerian payments company, for those that aren't familiar. And again, what they focus on is what their core focus has been on is merchant payments. Something that there have been multiple models that have looked at ways to make merchant payments more digital and more efficient over time. Flutterwave has been able to scale quite significantly. Certainly the amount of capital they've been able to raise has been a key factor in terms of their ability to be a prominent player in Nigeria, but also in multiple other markets throughout the continent. Another key piece, though, has been their ability to really understand through this massive merchant base that they're creating, what those flows and habits are for those merchants, what's driving certain merchants to transact, how to be able to upsell those merchants, and to be able to leverage that to facilitate additional services over time beyond just payments, but to the potential to be able to move into savings, to be able to generate credit histories for these merchants that can be leveraged to monetize credit transactions. And a significant portion of the valuation and the capital they've been able to raise, and I would say not just Flutterwave, but across Africa, seeing the increase in global players like SoftBank, Andreessen Horowitz, Tiger, certainly Y Combinator, large corporates like Visa coming into the market. A major factor has to be the upside potential that leveraging these insights about data points that were previously very difficult to map and to analyze, the upside that presents in terms of layering on additional goods and services over time. In terms of Mercy Corps, we've invested in several companies that are leading this trend as well. As I mentioned, we were early investors in Levy. There's a company in Africa that we've invested in called Kunda in South Africa. They're using artificial intelligence to be able to develop instant point of sale short-term loans for merchants. Think of the mobile money merchants or corner shop merchants that are facilitating transactions for communities in areas that are not close to banks or financial institutions. And their approach has been interesting by working with larger financial institutions as well as telcos that already have existing mobile money outlets. Kunda has been able to get pretty significant data sets in a short amount of time to be able to train their AI and get really world-class default rates in terms of credit to small businesses. I believe their primary product has a 0.3% default rate on their overdraft, and they have some other short-term loan products which have low single-digit default rates as well. Another company we've invested in that I thought would be interesting to highlight is a company called SocoWatch. We invested in several years ago. They just recently raised a $100 million plus round that was announced last week. What they do is provide logistics services, inputs for small businesses started in Kenya and now have expanded into multiple markets again throughout Africa and are looking to move from East Africa to West Africa in the short term. And their big innovation has been by owning logistics to be able to provide these corner shops with access to regular inventory. they've been able to learn a significant amount about these corner shops that previously transacted in cash and didn't have real data points to be able to access things like credit. SocoWatch is now able to provide a solution to these merchants that includes not just inventory on demand, but access to credit, access to savings accounts, which is something that we've been piloting with them. And all of these services enhance the merchant experience. Also have benefits to SocoWatch in terms of increased higher retention rates, a higher basket values per customer for SocoWatch, and give the potential to start to layer on additional services over time as well. A big advantage for SocoWatch about having all of this data digitalized is that they've been also able to get to a point where they're able to analyze store buying needs, and on a mass scale can now have predictive analytics to be able to determine, even before a store owner knows that they're low on something, what that product is going to be, and to be able to have the sufficient stock within SocoWatch's inventory and warehousing to be able to provide that directly to their merchants. I just wanted to close with, I think, undoubtedly the role of AI and ML has had a huge impact on scale up of a lot of different startup business models across emerging markets, really across sectors. Fintech and lending is an area that we've seen a significant amount in, but as the previous two speakers highlighted, it's not limited to fintech lending credit algorithms. We've seen it in everything from medtech to job tech to ed tech, ag tech. Geospatial data is a big piece that we've been looking at from an agriculture and a climate standpoint, and in other sectors as well. I did kind of just want to close though on one point, maybe a word of a caution or a point of reflection, which is that when we're thinking about the role of these types of technologies in emerging markets, and particularly with early stage startups that are just getting going, I think it is important to take a certain step back and appreciate with a little bit of a grain of salt that to get as Kalyan rather actually mentioned in his presentation, in order to really get robust and viable and useful data sets, to have realistic algorithms that can serve a purpose, it does require getting to pretty significant volumes of data. Now, a lot of the startups that we come across, and I just again issue this as sort of a word of caution, that we come across that talk about the value of AI and ML in their models, they're really not at a point that they have a sufficient data set or a sufficient track record to be deploying AI or ML with any valuable degree of accuracy. And so in some cases that requires taking bets that a company is going to be able to get to that data set over time. In some cases it requires maybe parsing through and saying, is AI or ML really the innovation here? Is this relevant, or is there another piece of the business model that's really going to be more critical for the business to achieve success in the near to medium term? I think kind of a good example of where this has been challenging is looking at some of the first and leading consumer credit fintech credit models that have been in Africa and expanded into other markets as well. One of the things that we saw is as they started deploying loans to consumers, there is a need for them to start to build a history and a sufficient number of data points to be able to actually figure out which consumers were creditworthy and which ones weren't. And so, a couple of these companies started off with just making loans to everyone, learning from that data set, and then starting to refine their model, and over time getting to more and more precise lending models in that market. This is obviously a very expensive and inefficient way to build a data set, and so something that not all startups have the potential to do, nor is it necessarily the path of least resistance. Then importantly, they took, say, their learnings from building these data sets in Nairobi in Kenya, and tried to expand to another market, say Accra in Ghana, and deploy the same algorithm, and found that that algorithm from Nairobi, not surprisingly, is not relevant when you look at a population in a completely different market in West Africa, and had to begin that process again. And so I think just to highlight, there's a tremendous value in these models, and I think that's been proven out. But there's also a need to recognize a certain degree of caution in terms of the ability to actually build out the data sets to make these models live up to their full potential, which is true everywhere, but I think particularly salient in emerging markets. So with that, I'm probably over. Let me pause, and I'll pass it over to Sayuri.
Thanks, Sam. That is really a lot of insight from an investor perspective, and I appreciate that. And at this time, let me invite all the speakers to turn your video on so we can see each other as we go through Q&A. And since I'm the moderator, I get the opportunity to pose a first question to all of you before I turn over to the audience questions. So let me start with Jacob. Kalian went through kind of how he got started and found their product market fit. And I love to hear from your story as to whether or not you have to make pivot, and how did you arrive at the product market fit that you got to today.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks so much, Sayuri. Being a mission-driven entrepreneur is fantastic because you know where you're going, and your investors know where you're going, and your team knows where you're going. That doesn't mean the market knows where you're going. And in fact, in the B2B space, B2B, selling to corporates, particularly selling to big enterprises, you see a problem 10 or maybe even 15 years before they do, right? Particularly when you come as an engineer, as I would imagine, many people from MIT that are looking at social entrepreneurship are looking at the world through the engineering lens, which is fantastic, again, because you see the problem that you need to solve. But it can take a decade or more until the way that companies are organized can buy that solution. So for us, we started nearly a decade ago, focused on solving this performance problem that companies have. We always heard companies say it's so hard for us to find people. It's so hard for us to hire qualified people. And as engineers, it was always very clear to us that that's because you're not looking for the right profile of person, and you don't know where to look for them. So you need to use technology to understand the profile that you're looking for, and where is the easiest place to actually find this person. So we started with the idea that this was a B2C issue. We started focused on developing SMS tools and simple applications to find people in the slums around Sao Paulo, and later on across Brazil, and then subsequently also in the Andean region and on into Mexico. We started solving this B2C access problem before we realized that really digging into this, really this had everything to do with the way that companies were actually approaching their hiring processes. So we made a number of pivots. I think I've heard some fantastic entrepreneurs say that you're always pivoting. I've been super lucky because my co-founder was my best friend at Stanford 20 years ago. So we've been fighting the noble fight for many years together, and we've also been super lucky to have a lot of great people jump on and sign up for our mission, and some of whom have been with us for 8 years, that we consider basically founders as well. So I would say seeing the problem 10, 15 years before everyone else is fantastic. It can also be very trying. It will teach you if you truly are a mission-driven entrepreneur or not. But I would say that today, the fact that we're having this panel about AI in emerging markets, and also, very clearly the world has realized that the labor market is broken, and wherever the country is, whether it's U.S. or Saudi Arabia or Brazil, everyone is having a massive amount of difficulty finding people to work, particularly in service sector jobs. So it has come full circle. I would have loved for it to come full circle a few years earlier, but we feel like that it now present in 2022 post pandemic, all the seas have kind of collided. So it's an exciting time, and we're seeing. I'll speak to this as well. We sponsored last weekend the largest retail conference in Brazil, and the CEOs and chief sustainability officers from Carrefour, McDonald's, all the major employers across the region spent a weekend talking about ESG. And I mean, that's just incredible. You would have never thought that this would happen in Latin America, but it's here. So this is a super exciting time for us, and it took a lot of pivots and a lot of years, a lot of patience to get here, but it's an exciting time.
Great. Thanks so much, Jacob. And my next question is with Kilian. So, when you started going down this path of starting a social enterprise, you didn't have any engineering or medical background, right? So how did you think that you can build a company that you have built?
So, Sayuri, I think that I did not have a medical background, but I am a computer science engineer by profession.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
That was the easy part, right? I mean, the first few versions of 5C were all kind of built by me. I would say reasonably poorly, but it got the job done. It's obviously nothing like what it looks like today, slick interfaces, great architecture in the back end. But I would actually say, Sayuri, that in today's world of low code and no code and all the tools that are coming up, I mean, your computer engineering degree is probably only useful maybe at a later point where you really need to build something very complex. So incidentally, the first version of 5C, the absolute pilot of 5C, was on Dropbox. We didn't even have an interface. The first thing that I needed to prove was that there is a client, a hospital or a diagnostic center, who has the ability to send a radiology image to somebody else, and somebody else will be willing to look at it and report it and give them a report, right? So to prove that MVP, I did not write a single line of code. I just, set up multiple Dropboxes and managed permissions for a bit. Then we started building out a platform that allowed for the whole annotations and the EIPs. But obviously at that time, my computer science degree helped. I think, coming to your point of no medical background, definitely that pushed me to go and work with some of the leading radiologists, healthcare thinkers in the country to really understand the problem. And in some ways, Sayuri, I would say that it is also to some extent a bit beneficial, because I'm completely unencumbered by so much of what a medical professional in India would think is a fact. For me, like, I'm able to question assumptions as an outsider a lot easier. And so many entrepreneurs would tell you that, right? That being an outsider is actually a boon, because you don't have to unlearn so many things. And I think so. Yes, I mean, I did not have a great understanding of the medical facets of the business, and I went and sought out the leading professionals, some of whom work at 5C today. Apart from that, as a technology person and thinking through the process, thinking through the business model, I think it actually helped to some extent that I was an outsider and I could come in with a fresh take.
Thank you so much for that. So I actually am going to hold my question for Dan to the end, because we are having some questions from the audience. So I want to make sure that those get addressed as well. So this is a question from PK, and it's to Jacob. Levy has an interesting approach to recruiting, and it's an innovative use of AI. do you use on-the-job performance data to train your model? If so, how do you obtain this data, overcoming privacy concerns and proprietary considerations? And let me add the other question he has also, how you ensure your models are free from bias? Jacob.
Great. Perfect. So I think jumping into the world of machine learning as an engineer, I think it's super important not to try and solve problems perfectly, but to solve them in a way that is much better than they are today. I think is really key. So, bias free. I'm not sure if the concept actually exists, but I do know that we can do a lot to remove systemic bias specifically from these processes. So our objective again isn't to eliminate bias, it's to drastically reduce it. And we have audited impact results. So 60 decibels, which is another portfolio company of Acumen, also an investor of ours. They go through our numbers frequently, quarterly, and we produce these results about the share of females, and specifically in Latin America, where racial inclusion is a huge issue, the share of African Brazilian and African Colombian people in the workforce. And on average, we're within 6 months, we're reducing these rates by 10%, right? So we're doing something right, obviously. And I think that, where we're coming from in the world, given, how unjust and how unequal these societies are, is we're really using technology to calibrate the workplace to look like society, right? I mean, a company should reflect its consumers and the people that they're doing business with. So, our goal isn't to create a supercomputer that comes up with the perfectly bias-free situation, but rather just to bring parity to businesses and the communities that they do business in. In terms of on the job data. So companies have the data. The difficulty is normally for them integration. So generally, the human resources team is not necessarily very high on the list of priorities, and it's actually kind of getting worse, unfortunately, because companies have internal teams with analysts and developers. But when someone from the marketing team or sales team comes across and says, actually, I need these developers allocated to me, that's a pretty quick conversation over and over, unfortunately, which we see happening. So a lot of our value add is really bringing that data from different places in the company into something that HR can use to make better decisions. So we're GDPR first. We have to be. You can't have a data science company in this decade if compliance isn't your at the very front of your discourse. So that's the first conversation that we have with companies is, make sure that not only do they understand how their data is being used and protected, but that they understand that, it's actually much better for them to work with Levy than to try and take care of compliance on their own. It's getting more and more complex, and we're experts at it.
Great. Thank you, Jacob, for that. So this is a question from Jude. Jude, I noticed a lot of work on data and AI. What are some of the challenges some businesses are facing in the adoption of AI and big data? I'll give this to Dan.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I tried to allude to some. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I saw myself froze for a sec. Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I tried to allude to some of this at the end of my presentation. I think, there's just a big challenge in terms of limited data sets for emerging markets. There's a move towards digitizing a lot of data sets that just still are not digital. One of the things that we've actually run a pilot on is there's a booming industry in terms of data tagging in across emerging markets, low income or sort of freelance workers doing data tagging of basic images, and in Africa, which is helping to build up some of those data sets. And we did an interesting pilot looking at different payment mechanisms to better incentivize those workers. But I think that highlights just sort of the lack of data is a big challenge. Another challenge, as long as we're talking about talent, sort of on one end of the spectrum, on the other end of the spectrum is having the talent in a lot of these markets is challenging when it comes to more high-skilled workers. And we're constantly seeing across our portfolio and elsewhere, some of the biggest needs of startup ecosystems are having highly skilled experts from the markets that understand the market complexities where businesses are being based, that have technical skills. And so I think we're seeing, in response to that, a pretty significant ramp up of things like coding boot camps and technical institutions throughout emerging markets. There's one of the few non-fintech unicorns in Africa is a company called Andela, which is doing training in terms of programming and coding to fill that gap. But yeah, I'd say those are really the two kind of the two biggest challenges is finding out the right way as a small business, a small early stage cash strapped startup, to build or access a data set with a limited amount of capital. And then on the other hand, having the right team in place that can actually analyze that data and that understands the market realities to be able to analyze it effectively.
I think a similar question came up, and I think Kalian, you might have typed your answer in, but what I gather from the question is really, how do you find the talent to help you kind of do this AI and data science, embed that into your solution? So Kalian, maybe you can answer that for everybody in the audience.
Oh, absolutely. I think the question was around how, it's really difficult to get, good talent around data science and AI, and how a social enterprise is doing this. So I think, as you mentioned, Sayuri, obviously a social enterprise is one that has an impactful bent of mind and a mission, but not necessarily, something that is not trying to make any money, right? They're all trying to make money and do good while doing it. And so I actually think that if the mission is very clear and well articulated, that actually is an advantage in actually attracting talent, because a lot of people come from the same bent of mind, right? They also want to see their work doing good. They want to be, it's a part of the self-actualization journey. And social, social enterprises actually provide that ability, right? If you're just, sticking ads, into more spaces, you may not have that self-actualization. But if you're saying that, hey, I can help so many people, some of the amazing work that Jacob is doing, I can help more women in underprivileged situations get employed and be employable and have more opportunities. That's something that people are willing to give, some of the best years of their life to. And it requires a bit of selling from our side, but I actually look at it as a positive. And I think that positioned correctly, you can actually attract some of the best talent and give them more meaning in their work by being the social enterprise.
Thank you so much for that. So now I'm gonna pose a last question to Dan to kind of close out our hour with everybody. So Dan, with all this focus on the potential for unicorns in developing countries, what is your advice to folks that are starting out in more traditional business, like more like the brick and mortar, more ag, and those other businesses that are extremely impactful, but at this point, not really highly leveraged on technology yet? What is your advice for social entrepreneurs that have begun their journey through that direction?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I was on having a discussion, a panel discussion, I think around a year ago this time, and I was asked a question something like, which sectors which sectors is technology having the biggest like disruption in emerging markets? And I mean, my feeling there's, I'm sure everyone would agree here, is that there's no such thing anymore as tech companies and non-tech companies. You know, all companies need to be incorporating technology, whether you're developing the, you know, quantum computing, or whether you're in a business that's manufacturing or a corner shop selling to customers. There's just there's no way to be competitive and scalable and viable in the world we're living in if you're not finding ways to incorporate technology. And so the first answer I guess I would have here is, do all businesses need to have, you know, a data scientist on their team? No, absolutely not. Do all businesses need to be understanding the way that technology is creating greater efficiencies in their sector, regardless of what sector they're in, and figuring out the right ways to be able to build that into efficiencies within their own business model? Yes, absolutely. Certainly, if you're going to be trying to grow and scale, to be competitive and to be able to raise capital from external parties that can help you continue to grow. And then the kind of second piece to that question, I think, is, you know, how as entrepreneurs should different entrepreneurs approach the kind of growth path, and what implications and trade-offs do they need to make there? And I think it's certainly true that a you know, data light technology startup that has sorry, not a data light, a asset light technology startup that's really going to be investing in a SaaS business model that, once it's built, can scale quite significantly with the right sales channels, has a very different path to growth than, say, a, you know, organic maize company that's working with smallholder maize farmers and helping them get access to international markets. And so realistically, I always think, you know, it's really important to understand sort of what's the business model and the vision that you have for your company, and then build a strategy around that makes sense. So, you know, I often have come across companies that I think really interesting business. They found an interesting niche in a local market. Maybe there's, you know, potential for a business to scale with a pretty limited amount of capital, get to profitability, and continue to grow 10-20%. If that's the vision of the company, that's the right growth path, then that's really what makes sense for the company. And going out and trying to raise, you know, with a vision to become a unicorn does not make any sense at all. On the flip side, and there's nothing wrong with that, you know, of course, yeah, we glamorize, you know, companies that are IPOing and, you know, raising multi-billion-dollar valuation rounds and bringing on big investors. But there's tons of companies that you know, we don't glamorize, that scale at a different pace and are equally critical in terms of solving problems and challenges in markets. And so I think, you know, if that's the type of business you have, there's no problem with that. Like any strong entrepreneur, look for ways that you can be innovating in your model, and technology can facilitate disruption. And think realistically about how much capital do you need to be able to get to a, you know, stable, sustainable point, and what type of capital should that look like? Because it's not going to serve you well to be chasing a strategy that's not aligned with your company.
Thank you very much, Dan. I thought that was an excellent advice for everybody. We are on the hour, so unfortunately, we can probably talk for another hour, but we have to stop at this point. Thank you, everybody, for participating, and thanks to all the panelists. Bye.